Hi.
Hey, there you go.
I have to say, I have managed to over and over kind of just make this so complicated. Anyway, I'm here, you're here. That's all that matters.
It happens. It happens with alarming frequency.
I just been, thank you for, really, thank you. You've been very kind, very generous. I don't know that I would have put up with this. And then I was working, I work at a radio station not far from where I am right now, and I rushed home and everything would have been fine except that my MacBook, I meant to bring my power cable and I rushed out without it. So I had to switch over to the phone and then that became, it's just,
Look,
anyway, it must be, I'm going to interpret it. It's all about the fact that, this is going to be like the greatest conversation ever.
We're here. We're fine. No harm, no foul.
Thank you, Alan. And where are you right now? Brooklyn?
We are last Manhattanites standing.
You're in Manhattan.
Yeah.
You're going down with the island.
My wife did her time in Brooklyn and we've ridden it all out right here. Yeah. On the island, waiting to see what was going to kick us out. Getting married, having a kid, going to school, but caught the right brakes, and here we remain.
What neighborhood are you in?
We are up on East 89th Street.
Very good. Yeah, there was a period of when I was married where I was up on Central Park on Fifth Avenue and 108th Street.
Yep.
And I had been down by Union Square for many years before that. So I and my family, we were all in Manhattan for many years. Anyway, I'm up in the Hudson Valley at this point anyway. So
yes. Where are you? Where specifically are you?
I am, well, at the moment, I am very close to Bard College.
Okay.
Which most people can kind of figure out. So sort of halfway between Hudson and Rhinebeck.
Yeah.
And then I'm leaving this apartment. I'm moving full time right across from Hudson, New York, on the other side of the river to a town called Athens, which is, it as well.
Athens, I don't know. The others, all I know.
Okay.
We had a house in Ulster County for a while. We were in Rosendale.
Beautiful.
For a while.
Oh yeah, great.
So
sure.
I know the environs.
And I know where you were, so very good. Anyway, and I feel like, I guess for years I've been following you, but I feel like when I first saw you and became aware of you and your work, I felt like, haven't we worked together? Because I don't think we have necessarily, but I just, I worked in the music industry for many years in the 90s and the aughts.
It's a big small town, God only knows what.
It's true. It's true.
Anything at any time.
I found myself working at Sony Music, though, and which of course is the home of Columbia Records, and and I know you've had a long, I'll call it a relationship with Bob Dylan.
Relationship is strong, but closely observing from a distance.
Yeah, sure. And Leonard Cohen, of course.
Yes.
But so to find myself as a still on the very early side of middle age, if not even slightly earlier than that, I would say, in the home of these guys, in the distribution company, was like, I couldn't believe it. It was like, I was just so able to immerse myself in music. It was a real gift. And then, was there for quite a while, and then I wasn't. But take me back. I know you have one parent at least who was in the arts, right? The doctor father as well, which is, don't get me wrong. Can you tell me the origin story? How did you end up being Alan Light, literary music, journalist and author? How
Well, how do any of us wind up where we wind up? But I guess the best explanation, or at least the most linear explanation, um, as you said, my mother, she was a former dancer, and she was the dance writer at the Cincinnati Enquirer, the newspaper in Cincinnati where I grew up. And so the notion that you would go see a performance and figure out what you thought about it and why you thought that and how you could describe that and communicate that, and how to kind of make sense and translate um, art as it unfolded in front of you, was just what I grew up around. And that was, that was the dinner table, that was going to my mom's office, when she was filing and when she was on deadline. And so, that was kind of always there and always present. My dad was, to, I will say, though, as you said, a doctor, and taught at the medical school, and ran the Children's Hospital in Cincinnati. He was also a big jazz listener. We did listen to a lot of music. We would go to see, when there was opportunity, which in Cincinnati was limited. So when there was opportunity to go see Dizzy Gillespie or Miles or Dexter Gordon or whoever might happen to come through, we would, certainly make anything that we could make a point of that. And so, though that was all there, is there ever an answer for why it was music? What was it that I knew, and presumably you knew, and many of us knew from a young age, that this was the thing that we wanted to get closest to. This was the thing that we wanted to try to understand and to try to get inside of. I don't know what that impulse comes from. I don't know. I probably misquote it, and I'm not even sure that it's him, but I think that I read in a piece many, many years ago by Kurt Loder that he wrote that that there was never anything that he believed in the same way that he believed in music. And that kind of, rung some bells for me in terms of, whatever that means, whatever that's saying. I think for as much as long as I can remember, as far back as I can remember, having that sort of feeling that there was something that was really special about, about listening, and about, getting close to and trying to decipher what was going on in these sounds that meant so much to me.
And the history of American music, anyway, it's a portion which is digestible, I guess, too, which is something appealing about it. You can kind of figure out the history of American music in a number of years of reading, of invest, sort of just in terms of doing research, and it's not like a 1,000-year long history.
Sure,
So,
but that's true.
We were alive for a good.
And not only that, is also the ways to understand, to do it the other way, and to understand American history, or to understand a culture's history through the music. I was very fortunate. I remember being, in 5th grade and having to write a book report and writing about some Elton John paperback biography that I had found, and, wrote about music through high school, the high school paper, and finding any opportunity to do this when and where I could. I started to DJ at a local community access station when I was 13, 14 years old. But so I was deeply involved in this stuff. We can come back to it. But I was also very fortunate when I went to college, when I went to Yale, and discovered the American Studies department, and created a concentration. Most people who are American Studies majors their focus is on American history or American literature, or things that are very, easy to put a course schedule together. But I had this idea to concentrate in American popular music within my American Studies major. And to the credit of the department, they were really, really supportive of that and helped me figure out, okay, what can we string together to get enough and make that make sense. But it really did give me an opportunity to think about, music as something bigger, music as something that related to a culture and a culture's history, and a historical narrative in a lot of other ways that made me think differently and bigger, about what all this was and about what it was expressing, and about what was important about it.
It was so that really it was doing your thesis, right? That I guess ended up opening the door to what would become a career, even maybe though maybe you had entertained the idea, I'm guessing, but
Yeah, I
maybe
mean, I
didn't.
had more than I actually had interned at Rolling Stone between my junior and senior year at college. So before deciding to write my thesis about the Beastie Boys and about License to Ill, I
License
had
to.
already put in several years writing for the college paper, and spent a summer, working at Rolling Stone and getting that at least initial internship foot in the door into that world. But yes, then came back and spent my senior year, spent 9 months thinking and talking about License to Ill, really sort of as it was happening. I mean, the album came out at the end of 1986, and then sort of exploded over the course of 1987. And it was in late 1987 that I decided that it was something that could sustain that sort of examination, that sort of analysis. I was so struck, as I think so many of us were of that age, how easily that just could have been me and two of my idiot friends. I mean, clearly these guys listened to the same records, they watched the same TV shows, they thought the same things were funny. They had also been swept up in sort of early hip hop in that way, finding all the excitement and vitality and everything that was happening around that music. And so I sort of became fascinated with, how did that happen? That it led to these three guys making this thing, and then B, what is that, explode that resonance, that explosion to me and to people like me that made the album such a phenomenon. I mean, it was the biggest selling debut album in the history of Columbia Records, to go back to your Columbia Records days. It was the biggest hip hop album to date, and recorded by these three white guys, well-to-do white guys. And what was that about? What was good, bad, ugly, certainly
that
interesting about all of that?
that's the thesis. That was what your thesis was exploring.
Yeah, there was a lot to look at. Obviously, there was the sort of racial politics of it. It was early.
Right.
It wasn't even sampling. It was actually tape loops, but it was the early days of that kind of, Rick Rubin creating these tracks using existing tracks. This was the 80s, so postmodernism was a very big deal. And so the idea of making records out of other records and where that came from, and DJing, and how that led to this other future, that was a big piece of it. All of that was, I felt vindicated at the time, and remain that it actually held up to spending that kind of time thinking about.
When you were interning at Rolling Stone, did your time there? Let's see, we're talking about the 80s.
It's 1987. Yeah.
Okay, what a great time.
It was an incredible, for a couple of reasons, it was an incredible time. I had an amazing internship there, largely because, and this is how old I am, that was Rolling Stone's 20th anniversary year.
Right.
We're now on the far side of 60th anniversary, or whatever it is at this point, but that was 20th anniversary year. And it was really the first year that they started to explore kind of the history of the music and the magazine and everything else. They did these 4 special issues that year.
I remember.
And the one was, they did the 100 greatest albums of the last 20 years, which was really the first time anybody did that kind of ranking retrospective. We're all, every 2 weeks we get a 500 best list nowadays, but that was really the first attempt to do that. And I spent most of my summer there working on that issue, and learning how to fact check and fact checking a lot of the entries and working on putting little boxes together with the release date, the sales figures, and the chart positions, and all of that stuff. And so, there was all this extra work, which was great for an intern because there
Mhm.
was all this other stuff that I could sort of pick up and get involved in and have a chance to show the staff there that I knew something of what I was talking about, that I had something to offer them and something to present. And also there was so much money coming in because of all these special issues that were these big, thick, phone book sized issues. So
Yeah.
it was the mailroom guy's birthday. There was a huge party on the roof, and so everybody was sort of
Yeah.
working around the clock, but also really having a great time. I was there for Kurt Loder's going away party to go leave Rolling
To
Stone and
FTV.
go to MTV. And so it really felt like I was kind of touching that kind of last Rolling Stone golden era moment. And it was hugely exciting and a really, really tremendous opportunity.
And I have to imagine though there are still these sort of legends roaming the halls there.
Sure. Some who were on the way up and some who were,
On the way out.
and some who were not necessarily on the way out, but, still some of those names that were rattling around. Um, but in some ways I remember more, and I guess the nature of being there, a lot of who was sort of, on the rise. And, Anthony DeCurtis was really sort of my mentor there, who
Wow.
was editing the record review section at that time, or took it over somewhere at that time. And we became very, very close. And he really sort of gave me a lot of my opportunity and, really worked closely with me. And I can never give him enough credit or pay him back enough. But, we had there was a really cool, the kids who were coming up with such an interesting moment, obviously late 80s, early 90s, where, I sort of ended up kind of taking over the hip hop desk, because there was really an awareness that there wasn't anybody on staff advocating for this music and plugged into that music at that time. It felt like the magazine was playing catch up. And so when I sort of started to do some
Mhm.
little things that turned out to be good calls, they gave me more and more latitude to be able to kind of write my own ticket and do more and more, within. So think about that. I mean, writing about hip hop with a relatively free hand in the late 80s and early 90s meant I got to go do De La Soul and NWA and Public Enemy and, LL at his peak and Eric B. and Rakim. And, it would have been like writing about jazz in the 40s or rock in the 60s, like the most explosive creative moment. And I got to be there, front and center for all that. So that was great. And then there was, Chris Mundy, who's gone on to be a big TV writer and is actually the showrunner for Ozark now. He was like the alt rock desk. Jancy Dunn, who's gone on to do a bunch of great stuff. She was a little bit more sort of the sort of younger celeb desk, and some of the alt rock world. So there was sort of this bullpen of kids, and we got to kind of take the stuff that was breaking through at the time and run with that. So I have only good things to say about my tenure.
Was that period of time you're talking about now after the internship?
So I interned at Rolling Stone. I went back, finished school, did my senior year, wrote my Beastie Boys thesis, then came back to New York. I worked briefly at another magazine called 7 Days that you might
Mhm.
remember, that the Village Voice was putting out for a little while, because I could get a job there, and there wasn't anything at Rolling Stone at that moment. But then 6 or 8 months later, something opened up in the research department at Rolling Stone, and so I did go back there initially as a fact checker and starting to try to write some stuff, and then writing more and more over those
They
next
had
few
to know
years.
by then. They had to know by then that you had the goods just from the time you were there. And I was, because going just a little bit back, stepping back to what you were talking about, that period of time and your being the go-to guy. there was, I remember, criticism of Rolling Stone magazine that it was too white, that there wasn't enough focus. You know, there was in the late '80s. I do remember a lot of the '60s, you know, rock stars were sort of getting another big comeback
Right.
with you know, albums. And Tina was, we just lost, of course, was a great example of what I'm talking about. But yeah, there was this criticism that there were very few African American musicians represented on the pages of Rolling Stone, and I was wondering if you created, if you, what your perception of the halls of Rolling Stone were like, or meetings, or you know, because you were there, it sounds like, right at the beginning of their decision to try to grapple with all that.
Yeah, and look, I don't think anybody would argue or doubt for a minute it was pretty lily white, up and down at the magazine, and it was still, so rooted in such a traditional sense of rock and roll,
Right.
and so
And male, right.
and male. Um,
Yeah.
there was, so there was, I think that there was tension between, and as we know, this was tension that had played out at, and kind of been decided a little bit earlier at MTV, but between, what it is to continue to maintain an institution like Rolling Stone, which is how much is this about retaining the identity and the roots and the definition that we have existed with until now, and how much is it about evolving as the music and the youth culture evolve. And so there was certainly criticism saying there should be, the hip hop needed to be covered more, Black artists needed to be covered more. There was tension the other side saying, this is a rock and roll magazine, they don't play guitars, we shouldn't be writing about that stuff. And certainly at that time, before hip hop had really taken over the world in the way that it would a few years later, that was an active struggle. I was able to get in most of the stuff that I wanted to get into the pages, but probably everything not quite to the scale that I would have liked, right? I was able to get features in that should have been cover stories. I was able to get news stories in that should have been features, but you took the wins where you got them. And, and also tried to use, and again, full credit to working closely with Anthony through these years, trying to bring more Black voices and Black writers into the pages, trying to say this music should be covered by more of the voices representative of the community that it's coming from. And I think we did introduce a bunch of writers, many of whom then ended up going over with me to Vibe when we launched Vibe, but starting to bring those voices in there. Look, it still drives me crazy that I was never able to get Public Enemy onto the cover of Rolling Stone. That, and I think it's something that Jan looks back and others look back with regret. That was a mistake. But those were the fights that I was fighting. And interestingly, most of the hip hop stuff I could get into Rolling Stone because even then there was a sense that it was kind of rock and roll enough and, countercultural enough, and the skate kids were into it, and some of the metal kids, some hated it, but some were into it. And so most of that stuff I could get in. The hardest fight for me, and then ultimately the thing that I really staked a lot of what Vibe became, was getting R&B into Rolling Stone. I could get Cypress Hill into Rolling Stone. I could not get Mary J. Blige into Rolling Stone.
Interesting.
That was seen as, too female, too Black, too kind of soft. There was not the understanding that was, something that fit in a rock and roll context. Right. And when we went off to work on launching Vibe, I said from the beginning, this magazine is going to live or die on whether we get the R&B stuff right. Because if we do, it's bigger than anything. And there's a huge opportunity there. The hip hop stuff, again, Rolling Stone was covering to a degree. Something like The Source existed to do hip hop for a purely hip hop audience. If we want to break that stuff bigger, it's going to be the R&B side that's really going to be the open lane for us. And that was a big distinction.
And so what were your Vibe years?
So Vibe launched in 1993. I left Rolling Stone initially to go be the music editor at Vibe when we launched. I was in that role for about a little less than a year when our editor-in-chief left, and I ended up taking over the editor-in-chief role in 1994, which was nuts, amazing, terrifying, something I was not remotely prepared for, but somebody had to do it. And then we, kind of stabilized and righted the ship just a little bit, refined it just enough that the magazine then really exploded over the next couple of years, and we tripled our circulation in less than 3 years, and really took that magazine and put it on the map.
Did that have a what was like the breakdown of the readership for Vibe? I'm curious to know.
Really, really interestingly mixed.
Yeah. Huh.
The most interesting way is there was always the perception and always the way that magazines were sold that music magazines were all dudes, that it was a male space, that it had the like collecting baseball cards side to it, where the only people who read music magazines were men. And every which way we tested, Vibe came up really split male female, which can be challenging from the ad sales side.
Right.
There are advantages to it and there are disadvantages to it, but I don't think anybody was fully prepared for that. And it was very mixed racially. I mean, I don't remember the breakdown. It was probably 2/3 black, 1/3 white, something like that. But I think as we in a lot of ways hoped for, that it was not a limited audience, and that was the reason that it could grow as the music was growing so propulsively. I mean, this is now the mid '90s. We launched. I mean, Snoop Dogg was our launch cover when Doggy Style was coming out. Well, the Chronic and that first Snoop record, I think if you think back to before and I mean, the Chronic, to me, there are two before and after records in hip hop. There was Run DMC's Raising Hell. Before that, it was seen as underground, weird fad, black kids, whatever, it's not going to last. That was the moment with Walk This Way and everything that happened there. First multi-platinum hip hop album. Oh, okay, so this is a real thing. Then the next few years after that, there was this real division. There was the hardcore stuff over here and the pop stuff over here.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There was NWA, bigger than anybody wanted to recognize, but still seen as very underground. And there was MC Hammer, or Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince. And that division, that division defined the Grammys, which records could get nominated for Grammys and all of that stuff. The Chronic is the moment that the underground stuff becomes the pop stuff. That's when MTV MTV starts playing Dr. Dre videos as they become the biggest thing. That's when all bets are off. Now, the kids, the street and the pop radio waves are listening to the same stuff, and then it's total reset.
And money hits, and then a huge amount of money hits the street.
Absolutely, and a huge amount of money in all directions starts happening, and that is sort of the moment at which Vibe is launching. So there's
the internet, I might add.
And the internet for sure. And, only recently, small thing now, but the shift to SoundScan as the way that charts were determined.
I was going to bring that up because
the two big and the two really radical things that happened when SoundScan came in, where people saw that, hip hop records and country records were what people were actually buying, and completely recalibrated the sense of what the marketplace was.
What a threat. And that had to really be jarring to the establishment. That's why you are such a great, opportunity, or talking to you is such a great opportunity, because you were right there in the thick of that period, which is, to me, such an enormous. Now, rock and roll, the rock and roll folks that we were talking about earlier, always paid tribute to the that they were on the shoulders of these great blues and R&B giants from the beginning of the American blues, right? Early R&B, soul music,
Right.
and but this period of time you're describing in the 90s, I just have to imagine it had to be this enormous uh, uh, source of anxiety for so
I mean,
many. Unlike, but not
anxiety
you.
and
But that's
excitement.
why I want to know you, because you seemed to get it, and didn't really look back. You look forward.
Well, what was so I guess any of us, we only know we know the history that we have. We know the moment that we witnessed. I grew up, in the shadow of the classic rock greatest generation, and grew up obsessed with the Beatles and with Bob Dylan and with Neil Young and with so many of those guys who I remain obsessed with to this day. But was fortunate enough that I remember, the first time that I heard Rapper's Delight, and
Yeah,
remember having my mind absolutely blown by hearing something that didn't sound like anything that I'd ever heard before. And and so being able to experience in real time, in as real time as you would get in Cincinnati. I was not, in New York City as this was happening, and so there was a delay in time and a limit in what got its way out to us, and something that you had to kind of go search for and look for. But having that sense as it was happening of this is the most vital, exciting thing that's going on right now, and it didn't eradicate or erase the stuff that I already loved, that I continued to love, that I was grounded in and based in. But there was also this thing that was just taking off right in front of me, that I was super fascinated to try to figure out and try to understand as much and as best I could. Certainly being able to speak both of those languages suited me well at Rolling Stone. The fact that I did do, all that said, while I was at Rolling Stone, I also did a Neil Young cover story and a U2 cover story. And my big break that really impressed Jan and sort of got me in the game was sneaking into this secret Bob Dylan show that I, was the only press in the room for, and got a big sort of exclusive thing for us on that. So I think that it made him and the senior staff listen to me more when I was advocating for new music and for hip hop records that were coming out, because they knew that I did know the other stuff.
you mentioned Rick Rubin earlier, and I think he's another guy who sort of, I don't think he came from the same experience as you did in terms of what kind of inspired him. But yet you end up in the same kind of place where you don't really make a distinction, or the distinctions aren't really at the end of the day that important. It's a matter of, are you moved? Is there a soulfulness to the music? Or are you moved by the music?
But
And
Rick's a really
um,
interesting example of that, because what people say in the end is the great contribution of Rick Rubin is he sort of introduced turning hip hop into songs. That because he came from a rock background, he looked at, there were a lot of hip hop records that were just like Rapper's Delight, verse after verse after verse, rhyme, 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 rhyme. And he was really the one who said, okay, let's do this, but put some structure to it and have a chorus to it and have a shape to it. And that was the, sort of the one of the great leaps forward. And for reasons that you say, it's not an accident. This was a guy who knew this other stuff and then was able to apply and adapt that, without taking away from what was so great about what MCs could do.
have you had an opportunity to check his podcast out?
I've listened to some of the podcasts. Yeah. I haven't read the book yet. So I won't say it's next. It's 2 down the line that I want to get to, but we'll be reading it soon.
You like me. I found that also. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, just I whatever it is. Rick and I both coming from, same age, suburban white households, attracted to this stuff, interested in this stuff, and figuring out what it made sense for us to be doing with it.
And then after Def Jam, American Recordings. It's pretty amazing.
Listen, it's said it's one thing to get there, it's another thing to stay there. To continue to be able to do work like that year after year after year, it's not a fluke. A fluke is hard enough, but when you can continue to repeat that kind of success, that's what it is to be great.
Well said. And wanted to just talk a little bit before I want to give you, respect your time rather, and there's a radio station beckoning that I work at, which, by the way, if you're ever up in the Hudson Valley,
yep.
or when, I shouldn't say if you're ever, I'll say when of the next time, please come through Red Hook, New York, not the one in Brooklyn.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You know which one I'm talking
yep.
about. And there is an independent radio station there, which I have to say gives one a sense of hope, and that it's a truly independent radio station, and it's not a college radio station, so it's
yep.
And it plays deeper cuts, and it plays alternative cuts and alternative artists. So if you like your Brandi Carlile, which everyone should, but
yes,
then
they should listen when radio is good. Radio is good, it is still the best. It makes me. Yeah, it makes me laugh. My son, who's just finished his junior year in college, has a radio show at the University of Chicago where he is, and he plays classic 60s, 70s Brazilian, Tropicalia, Bossa Nova, like that stuff. That's his show. But there was a day when I was listening, and I called him, and I was like, Adam, when did you ever listen to the radio? Like, how do you have any idea what you're even supposed to do when you're doing this? You didn't listen to the radio, you stream everything, and and he didn't have a good answer for that. It was like, well, I heard it enough, or around, or whatever. Like, how do you know when you turn the mic on what's supposed to happen? He still does enough that he pulls it off, but it did make me laugh that, like, man, that's another, I hope that it doesn't end up being a mark of another generation, but it's it increasingly feels that way.
When he graduates, have him give us a call. That would be maybe a potential path for him. But I was going to say, we don't really play much Brandi Carlile, but we play other artists, other female, let's say, artists, singer-songwriters, who are wonderful and that you don't hear on mainstream radio. So it's like, and then we'll do some classic rock, but we might do a deeper cut or something that's not necessarily in the top 100 or what have you. So it's a really special place, and the story behind it is also very special. But I also, as you know, since you're a guest here, I do a podcast, and I did bring on those filmmakers who directed the documentary about Hallelujah, the Leonard, the history of that that particular song. Yeah. Yes, it can be a 80 whatever minute documentary just based on one song, because it's a great story there. You yourself explored the same thing with your book.
Yeah, I since I got out of magazine world, after Vibe, Vibe grew so big that we ended up acquiring Spin, and I ended up taking over and running Spin for a few years, and then I left Spin to go launch a magazine from zero on my own, a magazine called Tracks that we published for about 2 years, and then my funding went away, and that was the end of that. Though it was a fantastic experience that I have zero regrets about and learned so much from. But it was clear that magazines were sort of not the direction to pursue, and so I've been, I started doing other things, and including fairly consistently writing books. I co-wrote Greg Allman's memoir with him and Peter Frampton's memoir with him. I wrote a book about Nina Simone. I wrote a book about Prince and Purple Rain. But certainly the most fun, the most successful, but also the most fun book for me was this book that I wrote about the song Hallelujah and its journey through the world. And it's really the one time in my life that I kind of had just that moment of like inspiration, question, something. I was sitting in Yom Kippur services, and the choir came out, holiest day of the Jewish calendar. The choir came out at the climax of the thing, and they sang Hallelujah. And you could just feel this electricity shoot through the room. Clearly, everybody knew it. Everybody was weeping. It was this super powerful thing. And I just had this thought of like, how did we get here? Like, what happened with this? And this was soon after Katie Lang had done it at the Winter Olympics. Justin Timberlake had done it at the benefit for the Haiti telethon after the earthquake. And just thinking like, man, what got this song to this place where it became this kind of anthem? And that became an idea, a pursuit, a proposal, a book called The Holy or the Broken, that was just, really, really fun, really wonderful for me to work on, because it continued to surprise me around every corner, finding out the history of this song, that, the years and years that Leonard Cohen had worked on writing this song. When he turned it in, that Columbia Records rejected the album.
Walter
Yetnikoff wouldn't put out the Various Positions album, which had that song on it. Watching it just kind of flounder in obscurity for a long time, and the things that sort of kicked it up along the way until, Shrek comes out and the snowball starts.
Jeff Buckley?
Well, Jeff, you remember as I remember. Jeff Buckley is revered now, but was not a big deal in his lifetime. I mean, the Grace album, it's in there, peaked at number like 178 on the charts. After he died, there became the mystique associated with Jeff, and then more. But what really happened was a lot of other singer-songwriters discovered Jeff and started championing him and carrying his music forward. So it was a gradual thing, right? And that's happening concurrently with people starting to discover this song and again, sort of then once it starts being placed in films and in soundtracks and in TV shows and more covers. And so I wrote this book and was really, really pleased with it. And it was very well received. And then soon after it came out, Dana and Dan, the filmmakers, approached me with the idea of turning it into a documentary. And we teased that idea out a bit, and I worked very closely with them for years. They worked, as they told you, for 7-8 years themselves, working on the documentary that became Hallelujah, Leonard Cohen, A Journey, a Song, which came out last year. And it was just great for me to work hand in hand with them, figure out how I could help them refine their vision, figure out who to talk to in different places, sort of jump in where I could, because they're such different. A book and a movie are such different projects. They are such different ways to tell stories. And I knew that, but watching them wrestle with how do we do this, and me saying, hey, this is your thing. You're not doing my book, you're doing your movie. So you tell me where and how I can help. It was just a really fascinating and I learned so much. And the movie was so well received. It is now on Netflix. We kept it in theaters last year. We were shortlisted for an Oscar. We had a really exciting. We showed it at a bunch of festivals, and I got the chance to do an updated edition of the book, which was also great for me because the Hallelujah story never stopped. It just continued.
There's another epilogue just
There's
around
always
the corner.
another place, another version, another thing that happens. So
just like there's another verse, always a Hallelujah, right? So
I did get to go back in and at least get it as up to date as of last year, which I'm sure is not still up to date. But you write. The truth is, as you know, anything you hope that people care for a day. You're lucky if they care for a week. The fact that this book came out 10 years ago and there's still a pulse around it and there's still stuff to do, and we're still doing screenings of the film and conversations and new places to show it, and people are still talking about it, that is so gratifying to me. It's unbelievable because, you know, you very quickly learn not to take for granted that anybody cares about any of this stuff.
There's another case of similar to this where Glenn Frankel, who is a film historian, I guess now, I mean, he didn't start off that way. He sort of just evolved into one. He wrote about 2 years ago, maybe three, a book about the making of Midnight Cowboy.
Yeah.
And recently, the documentary filmmaker Nancy Bursky made a film called, disturbing. Just I'm going to screw up now.
Yeah.
Disturbing times, like Dark Cities and the Legend of Midnight Cowboy,
Right.
And it's coming out shortly. It's out. Yeah, I think it's coming out in a couple of days. Actually, it's imminent. And I had on both of those folks over time. It's kind of, but another case where the filmmaker, it explains that she was inspired by the book. She didn't try to copy it, or try to. It's you're talking about a very different medium and a different toolkit, of course, in order to tell the story.
That was one of the first, I mean, it was part of pretty much the first conversation that I had with them, which was, you can't just you can't just do a VH1 top 20 Hallelujah countdown and string a bunch of versions of people singing it and call that a movie.
Well, I still watch that one, by the way.
There's merit to that. But like, if I'm doing that as a book, I can good or bad versions, I can take time talking to the person who did it, what they were trying to achieve, what didn't work. You can add something to that. On a screen, it would be incredibly boring to just watch people sing the same song over and over again. So it demanded a very different way of thinking than what it was for me to tell that story was not going to work on a screen. And they sort of turned it inside out and really made it the song as the culmination of Leonard's story, rather than Leonard as the nexus for this thing that came out and then took off around the world the way that it did. So that was, again, it was just great for me to watch and try to understand.
Wow. I regret that I didn't work harder at inviting you onto that conversation with Dan and Dana, because it could have been even
we've done plenty together. We do plenty separate. It's all in the same.
Maybe on the next
gang.
occasion.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, I'm thinking, I'd love to have you back sometime down the pike a bit, and something less of a look back, just something that's happening or that you're working on, or something where your opinion and your thoughts are, germane. But I appreciate you giving me this, like, pretty much an hour here, I guess, I'm guessing, or 45 minutes or something of time, just to kind of talk about mostly about your history and how you became Alan Light. And your son's name is Adam. My son's name is Adam. I have a soft spot for any Adams. Which I appreciate. Yes. Yeah. That gets you in the door. Adam Light. I like that, the name a lot. No, seriously, really, this has been such a treat. Absolutely my pleasure. And you know where to find me. So either for anything you want to punch in or anything else that comes up, don't hesitate. And one of these days, maybe I'll propose a cup of coffee or something. But if you do find yourself coming up the area, if I come that direction, I will. There's so much, first of all, of course, great music up here anyway, but there's also this great radio station. I'll send you the link so you can, it's very easy to find, but it's worth. You can stream it. You can play. I would send you the link to Stream Adam's show. But I'm not sure if he's going to be. He's not sure if he's going to be on over the summer. They're doing construction in the building now that it's summer break. So he doesn't know if and when he's going to be able to go back up. But understood. But I still, that's Tropica is. It's called Tropicalia. Tropicalia. That's right. Yeah. Which I'm a fan of, and I have a couple of collections in my collection somewhere. Yep. But yeah. Anyway, he said, please do if he goes back in the fall. He said there's enough dumb kids playing indie rock records. Like, they don't need another one of those. Let me see if I can do something. Something more interesting here. admittedly, we also play our share of sad men with banjos,
It's
guitar. We have a lot of that music as well, but the spirit behind it is pretty awesome, I have to say, and we need more
great.
of it. So good for Adam, and I'll look forward to maybe in the fall if he's back at that to check out this show
I will let you
or his
know.
shift. Yeah, thank you. All right,
Okay.
well, thank you,
Well,
Alan.
keep me. I'll pass on thanks to Adam.
Yeah,
Keep me,
please.
yeah, keep me apprised. And again, if you need me, I'll be right here.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
man. Be
All
well.
right, you too. Have a great
Thanks.
week.
Okay. Bye.